Good evening. Welcome, councillors, to the meeting of the Planning and Licensing Committee of the 27th of February. Welcome to members of the public who have joined us in person, and welcome to those who are following the meeting via Zoom. As always, please no speaking, ensure their microphones are switched on for the benefit of those listening online, and please be aware that you do only have 3 minutes. To member of public, if you're only here to observe or speak to a particular agenda item, please feel free to leave the meeting once the item is concluded. As we have quite a large audience tonight, just to let you know, there is no fire alarm scheduled. If we do hear the fire alarm, please congregate to the rear of the car park to the front. Now to the agenda proper. David, do we have any apologies?
Apologies from Councillor Wise this evening, Chair, so we're voting to 11.
Thank you. We now move on to item 2, minutes from the last 2 meetings, because one of them was an extra additional meeting. Firstly, the minutes from the 12th of December 2023. Do we have any comments? If not, if I propose them, please can I have a seconder? Thank you, Giles. And all those in favour? That is unanimous. And secondly, we now have the agenda, the minutes from the 16th of January 2024. Councillor Andrew Brown cannot vote as was absent. Do we have any comments? If not, I shall propose from the chair. Do we have, please have a seconder? Councillor Payne, thank you. And all those in favour?
It's unanimous, Chair. Thank you.
Thank you. Agenda item 3, direct declarations of interest. In accordance with the regulations, members are invited to declare any disclosable interest under the Code of Conduct and the nature of those interests in respect of items on this agenda, and or indicate if section 106 of the Local Government Finance Act 1992 applies to them. Councillor Corby.
Yes, Chair. Item 5B on the agenda, 2023-0991 is gone through. I'm on the Royal Parish Council Planning Committee, so I have commented on this application.
Thank you. Do you intend to stay for the debate?
Yes, no problem. But
thank you. You still have an open mind on the subject?
Absolutely.
Thank you very much. Agenda item 4, petitions, deputations and questions. We've had several speakers to request to speak tonight. Sorry, Councillor Payne. I do apologise.
Item 2023-1295 FUL. I know the gentleman who's making the application.
Thank you. And you're standing on that. Do you intend to stay and part of the debate?
I feel I shouldn't.
In that case, can I ask you at that point if you can leave the meeting? Request to speak this evening. These will be heard under the relevant planning applications. An officer will introduce each application and give the recommendation. We will then hear from many members of the public, any parish council representatives and ward members if they are not on the committee, and then from the applicant or the representative before moving to debate. We now move on to the substantive items for this evening. Agenda item 5, the planning applications. The first one is 2022-1111 MAF, Pheasants Roost, Linden Road, Manton. Change of use of agricultural to e-business to facilitate relocation of Willowbrook Education Limited. Conversion of existing buildings, adaptation and new build elements, including new yard and parking areas with access improvements. The recommendation is for approval, and the report will be presented by Darren. Thank you.
Thank you, Chair. Also like to bring to your attention there is an addendum item for this report.
Thank you. I believe that's been circulated to the committee.
Which has been circulated, raising a number of issues in relation to objections received.
Can I presume you will cover those within your report?
The objections that have received recently, they don't raise any additional issues that have already covered in the existing report.
Thank you.
There is legal advice bringing your attention that when you've considered this application, go with the recommendation of granting planning permission. Note that it is a personal permission for Willowbrook.
Thank you.
Education Limited only. There is also some additional consultation responses, and towards the back of the addendum is a habitat screening opinion which, due to close proximity of Rutland Water and it being designated a special protection area and a site of special scientific interest and a Ramsar site, is required to screen the proposed development. This has been undertaken, as members will see, and conditions are included in the list of existing conditions in the officer report, which were recommended by Natural England. There are a number of slides here. I'm not going to dwell too long on each, on the basis that there's probably in the region of 70, but obviously we can go back to different photographs if need be when we hear comment from either the agent, the objectors, or the parish or the ward councillor. This is the general location of the site in relation to Manton and the other surrounding villages. Wing to the south, Edith Weston towards this end, and Linden. This is a closer view of the site and the buildings. This is the access into the site with the existing residential dwelling on the left-hand side. Looking towards Edith Weston. Photograph looking towards Manton. Looking towards inside the site to the campsite pictures. On the right-hand side as you go into the access. This is looking back towards the access. The view of the existing house and the neighbouring property beyond. View of the western and front boundary. View down the driveway and two of the existing buildings. The existing house and the nearest building to the rear. These next photographs include areas of the garden area of the existing dwelling and the boundary with the neighbouring property, Wellfield. This is part of the boundary showing the existing fence and the building which forms part of this application. And this is a collection of photographs of the existing buildings to be converted and redeveloped. That's looking back along the eastern side boundary from the bottom of the site. These next photographs are views to Manton and of Wing. So this is looking back across the western boundary towards Manton. From different positions within the site. And this is looking across the valley towards Wing. And this is views from the site from within the neighbouring properties garden area. During the members' site visit, there was a request to see the original scheme that was proposed. These are the original site plan and the elevation drawings and floor plans. This is the proposed amended scheme. That's the location plan. This is the site plan. Elevations, ground floor plans, and then there's a selection of visualizations of the proposed development. on different aspects, viewpoints. Main issues relate to policy. These policies are listed in the report. In relation to policy, the proposed development would develop on the original farm layout. The scale of the proposal and the amount of new build is acceptable in principle and complies with the relevant policy of the adopted development plan. Local highway authorities raised no objections to the scheme. The access is on a relatively straight section of road and adequate visibility is achievable. The refurbishment of the existing buildings and the new workshop will enhance the appearance of the site and will not result in the site being any more prominent in the landscape than it already is. Conditions are proposed to safeguard residential amenity of the occupiers of the neighbouring property. In relation to noise, dust and contaminated land, environmental protection have raised no objection and conditions are proposed that cover all those issues. Trees and hedgerows, retained trees and hedgerows will be protected during construction. Ecological enhancements are proposed for the site. Condition is proposed to ensure that they are provided. In conclusion, it's recommended that planning permission is granted subject to conditions.
Please can I ask our first speaker, Colin Dodd, a member of the public opposing the application, to come forward. Your 3 minutes start once you start speaking. Thank you.
The planning application report states no development shall take place until 24 times. The majority of these statements are critical to the safeguarding of public health. Without these details being known, nobody in the room could say today that this would beyond doubt not cause any harm or hazard to public health, the environment, wildlife, or consider if articles of the Human Rights Act will be breached in this application. The Planning Office report states that with conditions, this application complies with all relevant local and national planning policies. Case law Tesco versus Dundee Council should read stated planning authorities local essential need to be there. No planning conditions can create this need. Planning policy 16, reuse suitably constructed and located buildings. No planning condition can make these buildings become suitable or be in the right location. Planning policy SB7, no building, new buildings must exceed to 50% by both footprint and volume. New build elements are 57% increase on the footprint and 105% by volume. The new buildings are higher. No cladding conditions can reduce the size of this site. If change of use is granted, the applicant will come back with a second application to go back to the original proposal. It's looking at policies SP15, SP19, good design. Don't know why the buildings are being positioned right on the boundary. There's no need for this. The RPA, the trees will be impacted by the buildings, by the new builds and the foundations. The dust extraction units will tower above the ridge height of the neighbouring property and will be visually intrusive to the neighbouring house and garden. The neighbouring garden and well field has not been taken into account in the BS 4241 environmental noise assessment. The data in the environmental noise assessment has not been collected, reported or calculated in accordance with BS 4241 standards. E2 lighting is not appropriate for this location on the high ridge above Rutland Water and the Chaytor Valley. Public protection was asked what would happen if the factory cannot meet the decibel rating stated in the condition. Would the site be closed to protect public health? The answer that came back, no, it wouldn't. Planning conditions need to be enforceable, paragraph 57 of the National Planning Policy Framework. Government guidance on planning states that planning conditions need to be tied to the land and not to a company or an individual entity. On design, the windows in the upholstery building look directly into the windows of the residents of Pheasants Roost, just 3 meters away. Development will cause noise pollution, light pollution, dust pollution, smoke pollution within meters of the 2 residential properties. No planning commissions make this development of good design.
Can I ask you to wrap up, please? Your 3 minutes is up.
Yes. The County Council has a statutory duty of care to protect the health and well-being of people, property, amenity, the environment, wildlife and the Rutland Water area. When you decide this application today, consider these points. Does this application comply with the wording of the Rutland County Council's local plan when read in a lawful context? With this application.
Please ask you to stop now because you're 30 seconds over.
Okay.
With any questions, please, from the panel for Mr. Dodd? Councillor Andrew Brown.
Thank you, Chair. Thank you, Mr. Dodd. You referred to the Human Rights Act. Which article in particular were you referring to, and how is it going to be breached?
I didn't say it would be, I said there's a likelihood it will breach. It'll be breached by
Which article?
Article 9 and Article 1.
Which are?
It's a right to home and the right for people's peaceful enjoyment of property.
So you're not saying they are going to be breached, you're saying they might be.
It might be. I'm saying that with the information provided, nobody knows.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you. Any other members? Any further questions? Councillor Smith.
Thank you, Chair. You mentioned public health as being an issue. Which particular public health issues have you got in mind, and have you any particular figures that you think would be
I think
adversely affect people?
the main things are going to be the noise implications for this site. It's an industrial site and it's going to be placed in the countryside close to Rutland Water. Now, it's a large site, as you saw, and it's only going to get larger. And there's manufacturing of products and the extractor fans and the plant that will be associated with it. The environmental noise assessment not been assessed correctly, and nobody can say, looking at that, how much noise this plant will eventually produce. They've only allowed for the environmental noise assessment, what the noise will be at the house. As you saw from the plans, my property goes all the way down and it doesn't count the garden area.
So you are the
neighbouring property there.
neighbour property.
Yes.
Thank you.
You see there's dust extractors there that will be blowing dust out. No dust extraction unit is 100%. Depending on what they're cutting and what the particle size the dust extractor will do, depends on how much dust will be blown out and where it will go. This is on top of a ridge, a very windy site, and the prevailing winds are from the south-southwest, which will blow directly onto my property. So I won't be able to open the windows of my property, and my house will be covered in dust probably more often than not. And there's also the issue of smoke. They had some flues on the building, and the applicants known to be burning offcuts of their product to heat the factory and water. There was a smoke issue and particle matter coming from burning of MDF and particle board in there.
Thank you.
Councillor Clifton.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I've just got a small point of clarity at this moment, which is very briefly, do you actually know when the location stopped being used for pig farming? Thank you.
Stopped being used in the end of August 2022.
Thank you. Any other members? Any further questions? If there is none, thank you. Thank you, Mr. Dodd. Can I ask Roger Hornby from Manton Parish Council to step forward? Same process, 3 minutes from when you start speaking.
Thank you. Manton strongly objects to this application, which seeks to move a furniture factory from an industrial estate in Ketton to a farm adjacent to the Rutland Water track. It will be clearly visible from Manton, Wing, Hambleton and the Chater Valley Ridge. RCC's 2009 landscape review noted that any development will need to respect the character of this sensitive area. Would approval of this application show that respect? Despite the statement in the report to this committee, we believe that a number of policies have been contravened. CS4 states that development in the countryside will be strictly limited to that which is essential need to be located in the countryside. This is not a craft workshop, it's a furniture factory bringing in raw materials in HGVs and sending out finished goods nationally in a fleet of large vans, while staff will rely mostly on their cars to get there. CS16. It is outside the planned limits of development of Manton and is introducing a new use, not expanding and safeguarding an existing use as required by that policy. In April 23, RCC's planning officer concluded that overall this proposal is contrary to countryside policies of the local plan, citing contravention of CS4, CS19 and SP15. We don't believe the latest revision changes this conclusion. The application was first made in September 2022. This version has been scaled down, apparently with the intention of complying with SP7, but an extract from an email from the applicant's architects to RCC, discovered by a resident at FOI, states, "It is still my client's intention to make a further planning application to move back towards his intention of having the whole process on one site. I understand that expansion of an existing business will not be judged so rigidly against SP7. Manton residents have some specific concerns about the impact on the village, which breach policy SP15. Greater volumes of commercial and commuter traffic, air quality affected by dust, fine particulates and adhesive vapours, firstly affecting Manton's newly refurbished playground, which is just at the end of that long straight road that you saw on the slide. Light and noise from manoeuvring HGVs and delivery vans in a lit yard. Substantial impact on the immediate neighbours. We believe that approving this application will set a dangerous precedent for industrial development in the Rutland countryside. We ask the committee to consider all the implications of this application for our countryside, which is fundamental to the strong and distinctive brand set out in the Rutland vision, which we are told is central to every plan and big decision that's being made in the county. We do not believe that approval of this application is consistent with this aspiration, and we ask the committee to take a lead by rejecting it.
Thank you, Mr. Hornby. Members of the committee, Councillor Clifton.
Thank you very much, Chairman. And Mr. Hornby, thank you so much for your words. Can I please ask you, you mentioned traffic. Could I please ask you, because being one of the ward members for the area, I know that there have been traffic incidents, particularly at the roundabout going into Manton. So for the benefit of this committee, I wondered, could you possibly expand on the traffic implications for residents of Manton and the surrounding area if there is an increase of traffic on this road going to this site? Thank you very much.
Well, the road going through Manton is fairly straight and quite narrow, and speeding is certainly a problem for us at the moment. One issue is the playground is on one side of the road and a lot of the village is on the other side of the road. So children and parents going to the playground have to cross this road. This application is putting obviously more cars in terms of staff travelling to the site and HGVs and this large fleet of delivery vans that leave the site on a daily basis, carrying away the finished goods. The long straight road has a record of serious accidents, and when you come to the roundabout, one of the people sitting there has had his house hit by cars on several occasions. So it is the road on which the factory will stand is known to be a dangerous road, and indeed at the entrance to the factory site, the previous owner was hit in an accident that involved an air ambulance attending to take children to hospital. For some reason, this particular accident isn't recorded in the police database, so that the highway assessment wouldn't have taken that particular incident, for instance, into account. And I understand that the police database is known to be unreliable.
Thank you. Thank you. Members, Councillor Karen Payne.
Thank you, Chair. Thank you, Ms Torby. You just mentioned there that there'll be a large number of staff and a large fleet of delivery vans. Do you know how many staff and how many delivery vans are likely to be coming and going each day?
Well, the original proposal, which, as we can see, is still the intention, had, I think, 45 parking spaces for the staff. And I'm not quite clear of the exact number. They describe it on the website as a large number of delivery vans. I've not got a number to quote to you there, but maybe Darren would be able to fill that in.
Councillor Smith.
Thank you. You mentioned that the factory at the moment is on an industrial site. Have you visited that site and the factory?
I haven't, no.
No, it's in my parish and I have. And it's in a very rural location, I would add, next to a farm. So yes, it's at the moment in a rural location.
But on a site, this is a planning
Sorry?
permission. It's on a site as planning permission as an industrial status, I understand it.
Yes, I get it. I don't know about that. Perhaps Justin would fill us in on that. Thank you.
Thank you, members. Councillor Corby.
Yeah, Mr. Hornby, you mentioned policy SP7 on several occasions with regard to objections for the development. Can you just give us more detail on why you feel that policy SP7 is?
Well, I think I only mentioned it once. Colin mentioned it in terms of reuse of building, what proportion needs to be reused in order for it to qualify under SP7. And what's been done in this latest iteration is to change the original proposal, which wouldn't have met the guidelines, to something that may or may not just meet.
Thank you. Members, any further questions? If there is no more further questions, thank you, Mr. Hornby. Can I ask Councillor Sue Fish on behalf of Wing Parish Council to come forward? Thank you. Thank you. Your 3 minutes start when you start talking. Thank you.
Thank you, Chairman. The objections of Wing Parish Council and many individual Wing residents to this planning application are clearly documented, and I urge the committee to give appropriate weight to these objections. This proposed development is in a very prominent position on the ridge of the north side of the Chater Valley. The Chater Valley and the views to the north from Wing across it are considered to be worthy of protection, following consultation and the preparation of the Wing Neighbourhood Plan. These views will be ruined by the size and scale of the proposed development. In addition, light and noise pollution to neighbours and across the Chater Valley towards Wing will be significant. It is an area of outstanding natural beauty with current low levels of pollution, which will be substantially compromised by such industrial development. The visual, noise and light impact to the north of Wing and intrusion into the Chater Valley is completely counter to the ambition of the Wing Neighbourhood Plan. Whilst there may not be a neighbourhood plan applicable to the area of the proposed site, it does impact on an adjoining neighbourhood plan, which is in fact going to referendum in 2 days' time, that of Wing Parish. And given the advanced progress of the Wing Neighbourhood Plan, this planning committee must take serious note. We also considered the transport assessment. It is an extremely fast stretch with the high potential vans turning in and out of the site. It also overstates the public transport infrastructure and cycling and walking to the site, in contravention to planning policy CS1. Inevitably, most, if not all, workers will use private vehicles. The application states actually that there are 45 current employees and only 37 parking spaces being provided. So car parking is already oversubscribed. Given the intention of the company to expand, it is likely that the site will be even more extensive in the future, with even greater traffic volumes and other impacts. This proposal should be considered as development in the countryside and subject to core strategy policy CS4. This policy sets out that the development in the countryside will be strictly limited to that which has an essential need to be located in the countryside, and it is demonstrably not essential for this relocating business. In conclusion, this proposal also contravenes planning policy SP7, as it is clearly detrimental to the appearance, character of the area, visual amenity, and the setting of nearby villages. With all this in mind, Wing Parish Council strongly object to the planning application and urge this committee to reject it. Thank you.
Thank you, councillor Fish. Members, councillor Clifton.
Thank you very much. Can I just please ask the parish council representative, I just, for the sake of the committee and myself, I'm presuming that when this was an active pig unit, in hours of darkness, you didn't really know it was there because there wouldn't be lights on perhaps, and at farm animals being nocturnal, effectively, there might be a sense of smell from somewhere in Manton, but in Wing, you wouldn't know it was there because of the light issue, and that effectively it's the light issue that is really such a huge issue for residents in Wing. If you could just clarify that for the committee,
I
that'd
think
be very helpful.
it's a combination, I think, of light. Certainly when it was an operational pig farm, it didn't have an impact across to Wing, either in terms of noise, light, and indeed the height of the buildings was not intrusive either. This proposal is very different.
Councillor Andrew Brown.
Thank you, Chair. Just a point of clarification there. Farm animals are definitely not nocturnal. You mentioned, Mr. Fish, that it's an area of outstanding national beauty. Is that a designated area of outstanding national beauty, or is that just because it's nice to look at?
I think it's partly because it's nice to look at, but of course there are particular designations around the water.
But it isn't a designated area of outstanding national beauty.
No, it's one that has been assessed as such by the Wing Neighbourhood Plan work.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you. Any other members? Further questions? Councillor McGraw.
Yes, I'd like to ask, you mentioned at one point in your presentation that there is no demonstrable need for this business to relocate. Can I just ask you to clarify why you make that assessment?
I said it wasn't demonstrably essential to relocate into the countryside, not to relocate at all. I fully recognise and value business expanding, but appropriately, this is not an appropriate location.
Okay, thank you for the clarification.
Any other members? In that case, thank you, councillor Fish.
Thank you.
I can now ask the board member, councillor Andrew Johnson, would like to come forward.
Thank you, Chair. I appreciate the opportunity of speaking to the committee. I often think in cases like this that it's a pity that the conversation tends to be adversarial with the planning officer either proposing or declining the planning permission, and the committee therefore is effectively in adversarial mode. As you can see from the number of supporters around from Manton and Wing, this application is very controversial in the area, in the local area. And you'll see from the number of objections and contributions towards the argument that there are a number of policies that could be viewed as going either way in terms of in support of or against the application. As it happens in this case, the planning officer has taken a view that the application should be approved, but I think there are sufficient examples of policies within all the documentation that would give you the ability to refuse the application if you so wished. My view is I just need to pose a number of questions, which I'm assuming you've probably already thought of, but I think it's important to highlight them. Change of use. Is it really necessary? What you're really creating here is from an agricultural unit that bred pigs and was relatively a quiet and ordered facility that didn't impinge on the local environment. Make no doubt about it, what you're creating here is an industrial estate. It may not look like an industrial estate now. You may think that it's relatively minor, but you are creating through agreeing to the change of use to an industrial use. This is quite significant in the sense of Manton and Wing and the neighbouring property. And I think you should really consider that. The height of the buildings will change. Okay, 0.8 of a metre. Does that really matter? I think if you stand next to a building, and I know you've been out to the site, 0.8 of a metre is actually quite considerable when it comes to ridge height and gutter height. It's only increased by 1,000 square metres in terms of floor area. Is that really necessary? Is that going to be the end of the expansion? I suspect not. I think what you're seeing today is the start of a series of additions to the site that will carry on for years to come. In terms of light, noise, dust, environmental considerations, there is a lot of input in the documents that have been lodged against the application. I think those need to be considered. There are a number of quite detailed points here, whether it's that the environmental reports are valid or invalid, or whether you consider that the environmental change, and there will be changes here, is considerable enough to warrant refusal of the application. Conditions. There are numerous conditions. I think Mr. Dodd mentioned how many. Rutland County Council hasn't got the ability to monitor all these conditions. Not at all. I mean, it's very nice if you're in the planning committee to think, oh yes, we're putting conditions on it. But I know, and I'm sure you know, that the ability to monitor these conditions is really limited. And, you know, what you're setting up is a task force that will be out to spot if all the conditions are being implemented or not. And I suspect, based on my experience of developers, that the developer will try and get around as many of the conditions as possible. That's what they tend to do. The permission is personal to Willowbrook Education. What does that mean? Why is that appropriate? That's a safeguard, but again, it's another condition. And I think you need to be careful in understanding what that means, because my final point is, what of the future? I know, and you know, that companies are transient. They are not set in stone. A company can change overnight. Willowbrook is a relatively small company based on its accounts at Companies House, and it files small company accounts, which generally means its turnover is less than 10 million. But the key thing there is the leverage. If you look at the loans, you look at the assets, you look at what it will cost to actually develop this site, there is a possibility that they're overextending themselves.
Can I ask you to wrap up, please,
Yeah, I am. Thank you, Chair. And what I would like you to ask yourself is, what happens in the future? If this permission is personal to Willowbrook, okay, the permission has to be acted upon within 3 years. What does that mean? Will Willowbrook exist in 3 years? Will it exist in 5 years or 10 years? There are 3 choices or 3 possible routes for Willowbrook Education to go. One is it remains.
I'll ask you to wrap up now. I've given you over a minute now.
Oh, okay. One is it remains the same. 2 is it fails, and 3 is it expands.
Thank you. We'll leave it there. Thank you very much. Thank you. Members, questions? Hans?
Yes, Andrew, may I ask, why do you think it's problematic, the name Willowbrook Education? Why should we be concerned about this? What would the,
You mean in terms of the permission being personal to Willowbrook Education?
yes,
Or the existence of Willowbrook Education?
yes, both.
Both. Okay, well, the permission has been made personal to Willowbrook Education. So normally permissions lie with the land, as I understand it. And in this case, the permission is being allowed to Willowbrook Education. Well, land is permanent, companies are transient. That's the point I'm trying to make. Although Willowbrook Education appears to have existed for the past 23, 24 years, there is no guarantee that it will carry on existing. And I think the committee needs to realise that when a permission is personal to it, the shares can be sold, the rights to the company can be sold, and therefore what will happen in future? Because what is intended here is not necessarily what will happen. It's a company is very transient.
Other members? No further questions? Thank you, Councillor Johnson. Could I ask finally for the agent, Richard Cooper? Mr. Cooper, you also have 3 minutes from when you start speaking. Thank you.
Good evening, councillors. This application has been materially reduced in scale during its determination period. The applicant has listened and acted accordingly to the consultation comments. Please be mindful that some issues raised early in the consultation and reiterated tonight are no longer relevant to the application before you this evening. Willowbrook Education will pay their business rates to Rutland County Council and have a strong desire to remain and develop within the county. At present, their leased premises offer no opportunity for expansion, no incentive for investment into the building fabric, which they neither own nor control. This application moves the company on from being a tenant to owners and will enable both new build and conversion elements of the proposal to be made fit for future sustainable buildings forming well-designed workplaces. Those councillors who recently met on site were able to view the existing buildings in their setting. You saw that the previous agricultural activity had ceased and the clear investment that this site requires. You saw the buildings are not visually prominent, being set a considerable distance from the road edge and at a lower level than Linden Road. You viewed the proximity of the buildings to the main house, now the applicant's home, and the adjacent Wellfield property. The layout and use of the building responds to the proximity of the neighbours, the softer upholstery and storage areas being those buildings closer to the existing properties. It was clear that the central yard area was to be visually sheltered and additional landscape screening was to be formed around this area of the site. This application has the support of your officers and has no technical consultee objections. I'm aware that some consultees have visited the existing business site to be fully informed. Officers have strongly concluded that all relevant policy requirements have been met. The office report proposes conditions which deal with both the construction and the ongoing operation of the business. The conditions cover all aspects arising from the application reports, along with some new information required, covering access, noise, lighting, working hours, extraction and mechanical plant, as well as securing the provision for biodiversity net gain. The application has been under consideration now for many months and follows previous exhaustive searches for suitable sites. I urge you to support your officer's recommendation and approve this application and support business growth. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Cooper. Questions, members? Councillor Clifton?
Thank you very much, Mr. Chairman. Mr. Cooper, thank you very much for appearing. It's very good of you. I've been struck that obviously the business that you're representing is obviously a reputable and valued business here in Rutland, located in North Luffenham, which the ward member who represents it obviously speaks of well, and you seem to fit in well in North Luffenham. But I hope you don't mind if I ask. I'm a little not confused, but you say that you're going to put 60% of the existing staff to Manton at Pheasants Roost and keep 40% in North Luffenham. And it seems to me that most businesses probably wouldn't really operate across two sites if they could avoid it. And I wonder whether in all curiosity, you perhaps want to actually expand the site at a future date and vacate North Luffenham entirely, which probably makes sense from a business point of view.
I'm not sure if I picked up a question.
What I'm basically saying is do you actually intend to stay in North Luffenham for the foreseeable future, or would you actually like to expand the Menton site further?
Well, we're here to decide this application. The application was reduced, as we said when we started off, to make it policy compliant. Business plans have to change. It wasn't what they set out to do, but this is their proposal, which.
Thank you. So basically what you're saying is that your current proposal is because you want to fit in with the guidance you receive from the county council, which is fair enough if that's your position.
So I just want to clarify for members, we are considering the application in front of us, not a potential future application. So we have to consider the facts in front of us, not what may or may not happen in the future. Councillor Andrew Brown.
Thank you, Chair. Mr. Cooper, there's been a lot of objections from Manton Wing and even Hambleton. Why do you think there's been so many objections?
That people they're free to object, aren't they? That's part of the system that we operate. It's change.
Okay.
Councillor Raymond Payne.
Thank you for the use of the first name, but my colleague, Mrs. Payne, I get a bit tired of jumping whenever a Payne is mentioned around it. There's been questions raised about car parking, traffic movements, the road outside. Are you confident that you have sufficient car parking spaces on this site for all of the people that will be to be actually there?
Yeah. So the information supporting the application used both TRIX data, which is general business data to establish parking numbers, and then a following survey of actual traffic movements at the existing site. So I think there is a little bit of confusion in other speakers' presentations today about numbers. So the 60% of staff that we're moving is accommodated by the parking numbers shown in this application. And the need that amount is verified by both the TRIX and the on-site survey.
So you're confident that there will be no spilling out of the site, that you won't have vehicles parked on the road outside the site?
Yes.
Right, good. Are you bringing any new jobs with you, or are you just transferring jobs?
Well, they're transferring jobs. With any growth, you create jobs in the future, but the purpose of this application is giving the company the space they need to grow.
Thank you.
Councillor Smith.
Having read through the application and all the comments and from particularly Meredith West, Manton and Wing, they are concerned about pollution in terms of light pollution, noise, but I'm particularly interested in pollution from dust. I don't know how much is produced by furniture making.
Yeah.
and in particular, whether you have technical detail on the particulate size that will be produced by the process. Because that does have health implications, which is going more and more to the fore. And I think it's particularly relevant to the Mr. Dodds, I think it is, who lives adjacent to the site. So is that information available?
Okay, so again, I think there's confusion on what is happening here. The extraction system doesn't throw the dust out elsewhere. So the extraction systems collect the dust from the cutting processes. There are the conditions that have been suggested by your environmental health officer are for the precise machinery extraction details to be presented to the planning officers. That information hasn't been detailed, but I'll point out again, your environmental health officer has visited the existing site and seen the process in operation.
I didn't quite understand. You're saying that no particulate matter or dust will be coming out of the site.
So it's collected at source, basically. So the extraction units there are they don't expel it out into the wider area, as has been feared by some residents in the parish councils.
Thank you. That's what I wanted to know.
Thank you. So Councillor Karen Payne was next. Thank you.
Thank you, Chair. Could you, from the application and the drawings that I've seen, you're only developing on the site of existing buildings, is that correct?
Yes, the site of it, yes, largely. There's one small area of a new build which isn't on the footprint of something that's there already.
And
So
is that obtrusive in your opinion?
Is it obtrusive? So well, 3/4 of a metre has been said elsewhere, higher than, this is the new build element, higher than the ridge that's there at the moment.
Okay.
The majority of these buildings are existing.
Yeah. Okay. Thank you.
Thank you. Hanson, you still have a question? Yes.
Thank you, Chair. I've just looked at the operating hours and I just wanted some clarification if possible from you. In regards to large HGVs, says that they're mainly arriving in the mornings, but your opening hours are until 2300. Is that incorrect?
Yes, it's incorrect.
Okay, so what are your operating hours in the evening?
So for the factory, it is 7 o'clock Monday to Friday, 2 o'clock on Saturday.
Okay, and when large HGVs arrive in the morning, there's no risk that they will have to stop on the road before being able to enter the site because it's still locked?
No, so as part of the highways scheme, so the entrance is being improved, and part of that improvement is to set the gates back sufficiently to allow, if the gates were closed, to allow traffic to pull off the highway. Can I just add on HGVs? So the floor area, the requirement for HGV parking is generated by the county council highway standards. So our floor area generates the need for 3 HGV parking spaces to be shown. We're not saying that 3 HGVs access this building every day. It's very infrequent. I think there's general, what we're showing provision for their parking as standards, but that is not what is described in the highways report as the vehicle fleet.
Thank you. Thank you. I believe next was Councillor Corby, then Councillor West, then Councillor Andrew Brown.
Thank you, Chair. Yeah, I could just ask you questions with regard to this business that exists in North Buckingham already. If they're going to be using the same manufacturing processes, what I'm getting at here is we've got the new areas here. There is a lot of concern, quite rightly, about dust, health concerns. If it's the same process as it is in North Buckingham, surely that's measurable And has that been measured? And are those the processes that,
Yeah, your environmental health officer has visited the site. He is the one who has commented on the acoustic report that's been presented with the application. So those existing processes have been measured at the existing site, and that data has been transferred to this site. Now, part of my discussion was that, you know, the business is looking to expand. The applicant lives here, as well as I understand that there is a neighbouring property. The applicant, this is the applicant's home. So then they're not wanting to disadvantage their own residential amenity as much as they're not wanting to do that to their neighbour. There are soft processes that are happening on the existing site, such as upholstery. They make beanbags, cushions, padded seats for schools, that sort of thing. And it's some of those softer processes are the easier ones to move here.
yeah, thank you. And if I may, just supplementary, Mr. Chairman, the HGV access, I'd like to know a little bit more on that for the next driver involved in transports. That looks very tight for articulated vehicles. And are we going to be able to drive vehicles drive in, turn around and drive out? We certainly wouldn't want any HGVs reversing from the road, whatever size.
No, I mean, you're looking at those tracked movements on the plan on the screen in front of you. So, you know, that's shown, that's been assessed by your highways consultee, and the improvements made to the access are as a result of their involvement.
And does that include articulated vehicles?
Those diagrams there are HGVs. Yeah.
Articulated vehicles? 45
So,
foot trailers?
articulated, yeah, 16.5 metre long articulated vehicles.
Thank you. Councillor West.
Thanks, Chairman. You've half answered my question, my question was going to be why here and not, for example, some of the vacant units in the Hawksmead Park in Oakham, which, you know, are still for town.
So Councillor West, that's not a relevant
No, but-
consideration.
Well,
We're considering the application in front of us, not why they should have moved somewhere else.
no, well, fair enough. Okay, well, it's the applicant's house, so I kind of get that now.
Councillor Andrew Brown.
Thank you, Chair. Mr. Cooper, I think Mr. Hornby said that something about 45 parking spaces. And on the plan I'm looking at here, I can only see 22. Do you know where that number 45 came from?
Yeah, that was the original proposal that was then downgraded.
Right, okay. Okay, thank you.
Members, any further questions? Just one from the chair, if you can, Mr. Cooper. I just want to clarify, going back to parking spaces. You said part of the reason for this application was obviously that the Willowbrook are looking to grow over time, which is a very, very laudable. You also said the number of spaces was 22 based on the existing staff coming from North Luffenham. So if there is going to be expansion of staff on this site, where are they going to park?
Well, we have, there's no reason to show more. All of our planning policies are trying to reduce car use generally. The survey that we undertook on this business shows a high proportion of car sharing. And that's, I think the company should be, no commercial development provides excessive parking spaces. It's just not, it's not the approach we take in terms of creating sustainable development.
No, but you would show, if you were planning to expand, you would show parking spaces for that expansion. So is there room on site for future parking?
There's plenty of room, but we're not showing that as part of this application.
Thank you. Any further questions from members? In that case, thank you, Mr. Cooper. We now open to debate, but before we start, Development Manager Justin would like to come in first, and there's just a couple of points, Justin, while you're doing that. Maybe you should clarify just a few points which came up during that. Things such as the weight to be given to the Wing Neighbourhood Plan, the rules about development in the countryside. Plus there was one more. We've covered off about the application in front of us only, but if you just cover those, because I'm sure those technical questions will be mentioned.
So I think in the first instance, all of the relevant policies that are relevant to the determination of the application are outlined in the policy. I don't believe there are any within a wing plan that would be relevant to this proposal. In terms of the application, just wanted to clarify a couple of points. First of all, the total floor area of buildings on site will reduce from 1,144 square meters to 1,130.5. And just to show, so the proposal this is an existing building which will be converted and reclad effectively. Likewise is this one here, which will be reclad, but footprint stays the same. The building that is in this location here, it is a sort of U horseshoe shape. This section of the building is to be retained and reclad. The section that is here will be demolished and this new build footprint will be located on here. So this is the only new build element that is proposed. And just so that members can sort of see the ridge height change, you can just make out the red line, the top red line here. So you can see this is the existing building that would be reclad. Ridge height stays the same. This section here shows the new, and that is approximately, as we talked about, I say 0.8 of a meter. I think it's 0.75, something like that, of a meter higher than the existing. So as we've already said, as officers, we do not believe that visually this development will have a significant visual impact above and beyond what's already there now. There's been a lot of concern raised about noise and disturbance and dust, and why is this a personal permission? So obviously the site has an agricultural use. It's not in use at the moment, but it could come back into use as an agricultural farm, which would bring its own issues with it potentially. What is proposed is an industrial conversion, and the policy CS16 does allow for conversion of redundant farm buildings to employment generating uses, but there are caveats to that. And in this particular case, a significant part of that is that if it were unsecured industrial use there, that could have a significant impact, and we don't dispute that fact. I think the fact is that any employment use to be acceptable under CS16 and SP7 has to be able to be acceptable and not have an environmental impact, especially in this rural countryside location. We've been, and the Environmental Health Officer has been and visited the applicant's existing site, and it's considered that the proposed use there isn't one that would have a detrimental impact, in particular on neighbouring residential use. So in order to make sure that that is the case, and arguably to give us more control than if this were to just go back into a general agricultural use, we have put on a number of conditions. There are conditions about hours of operation. There are conditions to ensure that there's details about noise, extraction equipment. As has already been said, the extraction equipment isn't going to be venting things out into the ether. The idea is that there are systems by way it's captured at source, and then the bags, vacuums and things like that are then emptied. I'm sure Craig will be able to provide some further details on that. There's also conditions in terms of protecting the night sky and light pollution, so that all details have to be in accordance with I think it's condition 24 and 25 that talk about external lighting being in accordance with guidance to which protects bats from lighting development. So if those are followed, then it is considered that this development will be acceptable. The reason why it's been secured and linked to the applicant as Willowbrook directly is because at this stage, one of the major considerations is that it might not be appropriate, or it probably isn't appropriate for a general industrial use up there. But a business that operates in the way that Willowbrook does and with these conditions is acceptable. And that's why it's tied to Willowbrook, so that if another industrial use wanted to come in and take over, we would have an opportunity as a local authority to consider any application for that. It would require planning permission, and then we could consider these same things. Does the business operate in a way that is consistent and appropriate in a rural location? If not, we would not accept it. As has already been said, we have to consider the application that's before us. As officers, we've spent a lot of time discussing and negotiating with the applicant and getting them to reduce their scheme. So I do not consider that it would be appropriate if they were, for instance, to come back in 6 months' time with a larger scheme, as it's been talked about. You know, the likelihood is that as officers, we would recommend refusal, because that is why we've negotiated it out of the scheme at this point. You're considering what's before you tonight, and based on our assessment, taking into account the traffic surveys, comments from Highway Authority and comments from our environmental health officer, we consider that that scheme is appropriate in a rural location, and that the buildings will not be any more prominent than what's there already on site. And on that basis, that's why it's recommended for approval. There has been a lot of consideration about the impacts of this development in terms of its rural location, the ecology, as has already been said, it is in close proximity to Rutland Water. We're aware of the sensitivities of that. But subject to all of the conditions, we believe the application can be recommended for approval. Thank you, Chairman.
Thank you. Members, Councillor Ray Payne.
I'm really glad you've talked about the conditions, Justin, because if I'm going to vote for this, I've got to be convinced that we've got this in a box and it will where it will stay and not creep out. I'm concerned about the idea of future risk, change of uses, all the rest of it. So I'm very pleased to hear you talking about conditions, and we're going to have to. I think the question I have is, and it was raised by Councillor Johnson, is can we be certain we can enforce them? Do we have the ability to enforce these conditions once we've laid them down? Because that's crucial.
Yeah, as with any planning application that we deal with, one of the requirements is that the planning conditions are enforceable. And yes, if there's a breach, then we will enforce according in line with our enforcement policy. But there is no reason to believe that we can't do that or couldn't do that.
Councillor McRobb.
Thank you for that, Justin. I'd like to slightly refocus Councillor Payne's question, not so much about the enforceability or enforcement of the conditions, but for that to happen, it's necessary that we can monitor the conditions. And I wonder how you can reassure us that that can be done.
I think it's as with any planning application that we have across the whole of the county, we will require details to be submitted and discharged, and we will keep them on file. Most of the issues are brought to our attention from parish councils, local residents and things like that. So I'm quite certain from the numbers of people that we have here today, if there were to be a suspected breach, that the likelihood is that it would come from a member of the public and be brought to our attention, and then the enforcement officer would go down and investigate. And if there is a breach, where appropriate and in line with our policy, we could take enforcement action.
Okay, thank you. So citizen monitors.
Well, I think that's the same with every development that this council approves. We do not have, in terms of resource, as many authorities, this is the case, we do not have enforcement officers that go around and visit every site that has got planning permission.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you. Can I just ask some clarity on that, please, Justin, or maybe from Kylie? Is a view on ability to enforce a material planning consideration?
So all conditions must meet the tests that are set out in the NPPF. So any planning condition that's to be attached to a planning permission must meet the 6 tests that are set out in the NPPF, and enforceability is one of them. Can they be enforced? But that's not about resources in terms of
That's my question.
Yeah.
If we could just get clarity on the resource to enforce.
Yeah. So no, the resource to enforce, no, but whether they are enforceable is relevant, yeah. So they can be enforced. But the council's resources is not a material consideration.
Thank you. Just for members of the public, we do want to like to clarify these points, because if we do push for refusal and it goes to appeal, we have to be very clear on our reasons for refusal and if they are arguable in court.
Sorry, can I just add, because I've got the test in front of me now. So just to clarify for all members, conditions must meet the following tests. They must be necessary, relevant to planning, relevant to the development to be permitted, enforceable, precise and reasonable in all other aspects. So any of the conditions that are being proposed tonight are capable of being enforced.
Thank you. Members, further questions? Councillor Karen Payne.
Thank you, Chair. I've got 2 questions, if I may. One's about, I couldn't see anything about signage in the planning conditions. Does that follow on later, or is it dealt with by this application?
So signage comes under advertisement consent. So that will be covered under a separate section of the planning system.
Okay, so that comes later. Right, and then the other question I've got, I think Hans alluded to it earlier. I couldn't see, maybe I've missed it, but I couldn't see anything that precludes the queuing of vehicles on the highway waiting for the site to open. Have I missed it, or is there anything in there?
There's nothing in the planning permission. I think the gates are set back, so that the intention being that when the site is open, vehicles will just come straight in, and if the gates were shut, there's potential for a vehicle to stop clear of the highway so that the gates could be open, so that there wouldn't be a blockage, which is the standard, assessment that we require.
So we won't get any blockages on the highway waiting for the gates to open. That's what I'm trying to ascertain. Because, on a lot of sites, we do get lorries or vehicles queuing to get into the site before it opens.
Yeah, no, I think the Highway Authority in their comments have taken that on board. And like I say, the gates, I think, are set back so that you can pull off the highway, open the gates, and that's a standard requirement that we require on, all developments.
Okay. Okay.
Yeah, I've got an issue, or I'm conflicted over enforcement. This plan, if it was farm buildings, if it was remained agricultural, we wouldn't be sitting here talking about it. I'm looking at some of the conditions that I wrote down earlier on when I was reading these. Maximum noise level 41 decibels. No external storage of goods, scrap or waste. Well, generally on industrial sites, we're seeing skip lorries in and out, putting in waste. No retail sales. no music to be audible beyond the boundary. These are quite extraordinary conditions on an industrial site. And I've got to come back to enforcement. How can we enforce that?
If there is you know, if we were to get complaints that there's music being played and it's audible beyond the boundary, then what we would do is Craig, as the environmental protection officer, would go down, would make an assessment. There'd be a noise meter if it's about, you know, one was if the music is audible, then that's a breach. If we can hear it, then, you know, and we will speak to them about making sure that that doesn't happen. If it continues to happen, we take enforcement action. That are the systems that are there. If they breach the noise level, again, if we get a complaint from the neighbour indicating that they think that that's been breached, then we can go down and monitor that. And if it is above the level, then we have the powers to take action. Likewise, if there has been, you know, rubbish, you know, stored outside on site, it's quite simple. We go down there. If it's stored down there, they're breaching that condition, and we can take action. I mean, you say that they're extraordinary conditions. They're not. They are conditions that we have used on other sites throughout the county. I think, yes, there are quite a few on this application, but they have been discussed with the applicant, and they're there because, yes, we appreciate it is a rural location. It is a sensitive location. And there is a balance to be struck there between the policies which do allow conversion of agricultural buildings for employment generating uses, subject to them not having an environmental impact. And as I've already said, I think the proposal we considered to be acceptable and wouldn't have an environmental impact. If we were to grant an unrestricted B2 industrial use down there, then that would be very different. That's why we've got these control in place, is to make sure that that doesn't happen and can't happen without requiring planning permission. So it would, you know, if that ever came up in the future, it would require another application, which would be open to the committee to consider. And in all likelihood, if it was for general industrial, as officers, we wouldn't support that.
While we're on environmental, Justin, I think you're probably just going to give me an answer that is reassuring. And if that is the case, then that's fine. But I'm looking at the summary of Natural England's comments, which are concerned with the risk of pollution into Rutland water. And there is a recommendation that the discharge should be to a drainage field. I'm not an expert on these things, but I have an approximate understanding of what that means in physical and engineering terms. What I wanted to ask was, given that these guidelines and standards will have almost certainly been derived at some earlier point in our history, are we still confident, in light of the recent extreme weather conditions, that the drainage field that would be specified under Natural England guidance will still be adequate if we have further storms and unprecedented flooding, as we've seen in the last several months?
I think that I'd probably draw your attention to, I think it's condition, 13, 14, 12, 13 and 14, which all deal with the drainage and the package treatment plan, which require further details to be submitted to us. Natural England indicated that they were happy that if it was done in accordance with details to be submitted, that it wouldn't have any adverse impact, in particular on the Ramsar site, which is why we've done a habitat regulations assessment, which is at the back of the addendum, because there are separate regulations for anything that impacts on Rutland water. And I'm confident that based on the discussions that we've had with Natural England, that those conditions will ensure that there is no risk, and it would be designed to take into account current weather situations that we're having.
And I'd like to hear you say, and the possibility of further extreme weather conditions that might exceed the records that have already been broken.
The details are to be submitted, but it also sets out in there the actual guidance, which is to the BS standards, and then in terms of building regulation standards as well, and environmental health regulations. So we would get that submitted to us, and then as part of our consideration, we'll consult with Natural England, Anglian Water, and also internally look at it ourselves from a lead local flood authority as well.
Okay, thank you. That is what I wanted to hear.
Thank you. Councillor Andrew Brown.
Thank you, Chair. Can I ask Mr. Howarth, the Environmental Health Officer, for his opinion on whether or not there is some potential for contamination from this proposal, or whether the contamination potential from this proposal would be greater or lesser than if it were to remain as a pig unit, or to be turned into an intensive dairy unit or a poultry unit.
Right. Contamination in what respect?
Environmental contamination from slurry, runoff, etc. Potential potassium phosphates.
Right. Yeah, interesting question. Obviously, intensification of use, people have talked about particulates. As you know, one of the significant producers of particulates, especially the smaller particulates, 2.5, is actually from intensive animal units. And so therefore, if it was to revert to an intensive unit, there would be potentials for particulates on that matter. It was raised earlier on about particulates and dust from this. Now, we have to be very careful about size here. Size is all important when we talk about particulates. The manufacturing process for woodworking are larger particulates, over 30 microns. Now, that's very important because it doesn't get into the human lungs. And the particulates that we are very concerned about, which affects human health, are those of high combustion and of, as I mentioned before, certain agricultural processes of 2.5 microns, which is very small. That can actually get down into the lung through the alveoli and actually transfer into the bloodstream. And these are the particles that cause the health issues. They're the ones that carry the carcinogens. They're the ones that can cause cancer and all these other things. There is another type of particulates PM10s, which we often talk about with quarries, as Councillor Beggy talks about. They are generally referred to as the upper trachea, which go down to the top of the throat. They don't go deep down into the lungs. So from this point of view, the furniture manufacturer would be producing dust that obviously for their staff, they have to have dust extraction systems. These are captured in filters and so forth. They're not expelled to the public, but they're not these very fine particulates that we would be concerned about of the 2.5s. And as I said, that if you did have intensive units there, that they would be actually particulates of that 2.5s, which are concerning.
Thank you. Members, before I ask my questions. Thank you. Maybe for you, Justin. My main concern goes back to expansion, number of parking spaces matching present usage as opposed to future usage. Can that at all be considered as a material consideration?
I think what I would say is that we have to consider what's put forward before us, and the applicants have provided, based on the advice from our local highway authority, appropriate number of parking spaces. Taking on board the concerns, I think that what I would say is that there is sufficient space around the site. If at some point and now I'm talking purely about the existing footprint of buildings there, if there was a need to increase staff on there and for some reason additional hard standing was required, there is space around the site that can be done without having any significant adverse impact. Clearly, that isn't the same as coming in for a new building, which I would suggest would be far more concerning to us as an authority, given the visual impact and the fact that we have negotiated that out of the scheme already.
Thank you. Just one final point. I don't know who's best to ask this, but are we aware of any complaints or issues with the existing operation in North Luffenham as terms of yes, mainly from Ukraine?
Yeah, we've had no complaints at all, and there are properties along the Ketton Road that could have been affected, but we've never had a complaint about the existing.
Thank you. Sorry, Councillor McRobb was before you, Councillor Smith. I'll come to you next.
Sorry, I didn't quite get in time, Chair. Thank you. Yes, I just had one question about the wording of, excuse me if I got the wrong policy here, but I think it was CS 16 that I think you said, Justin, that we were authorised to consider this application in terms of that policy, partly because it's employment generating. And I just wondered about the definition of that term, when it seems to me that it's not employment generating, it's employment relocating from one point in the county to another point in the county.
I think it's in terms of it is I think it's point F, which says that the strategy for the rural economy is to, and it says, support the conversion and reuse of appropriate local and sustainably constructed rural buildings in the countryside. It talks about them being adjacent to or located close to local service centres and smaller service centres, which this is. And then for employment generated uses, particularly where they would assist in the retention of expansion of existing rural businesses or encouragement of enterprises that have little adverse environmental impact. So there's nothing that says specifically that you have to, but it's really employment generating uses is what we're using for those ones that will generate or currently generate. So it doesn't distinguish between the two.
Thank you. Councillor Smith.
Yeah, I just wanted to comment on whether there'd been any complaints from North Luffenham. As I said earlier, I know the site quite well. I'm a bit surprised when I first visited to find out how quiet it was, and sort of didn't know it was there. Many times, well, quite a number of times, I've gone on the Ketton Road and also up the shared track with the farmhouse, which is very near the site. And I've yet to meet a HGV or, come to think of it, a van coming down that way. So its impact, it seems to be very low indeed.
Thank you. Members, any further questions? If there's no further questions, we can put the proposal to the vote. We now move to the recommendation to approval. Please cast for a proposer. Councillor Wilby, and a seconder. Councillor Smith was in for you, Councillor Payne. All those in favour?
It's 10, Chair.
And against?
1 against. That's carried.
Thank you. We now move on to agenda item 5B, 2023-0991 FUL. We'll just take a 1 minute break while members of the public leave. Yeah. Thank you. You can say that before the debate, Justin wanted to make a point, and then I did ask several times, is there any more members who wanted to put their hand up? thank you for that debate and the diligence which it was undertaken. We now move on to 2023-0991 FQL River Gwash Trout Farm, Belmthorpe Lane, Ryle. A 673 application to vary condition 2 of the approved plans on planning permission 2021-1268 full residential development of 11 dwellings. Amendments include the change of dwelling type of plots 9 and 11 and adjustment on site of plot 10. Plot 11 to change to a bungalow requiring alteration to plot 10 garden and variation to house type on plot 9. The recommendation is for approval subject to conditions. Darren, I believe you're going to present the report.
Thank you, Chair. Again, there is addendum item for this report. There's a proposal for an additional condition regarding environmental friendly ecology lighting. There is also additional consultation responses, including in particular the one from Housing Strategy and the Enabling Officer, which sets out the justification really behind this application, insofar as the previous approval was for provision of 3 affordable housing units that would be taken on board by a housing association. Unfortunately, that's now not possible. And the proposal is for 2 first homes on site and a financial contribution. And that would be subject to a legal agreement in addition to the provision of safeguarding the land for ecological use set back from the river as previously. Some of you may recall seeing this presentation previously, so I'll skip through quickly. This is the location of the trout site, fish farm site. Red line, red circle indicates the satellite image. Access looking up Belmthorpe Lane, looking back towards the village. It's the neighbouring cul-de-sac development. Looking into the site. That's the applicant's home present. Part of the garden overlooking the area where the bungalow would be built. This is the original block plan, which I appreciate it's quite small. This is the existing site plan layout. This plan shows the 3 dwellings that were to become managed by Housing Association. This is the revised block plan. This is the revised ground floor plan. And again, this is the plan showing the same 3 homes that would be 2 first homes and 1 that would receive the financial contribution to, being in the same location as the previous scheme. Policies are the same as before and as listed in the committee report. Planning permission was granted, as I said, 2021-1268. Principle of development's already been established by the previous permission. An affordable housing provider has not been found for the 3 units previously approved, changing 2 of the 3 units to first homes schemes and seeking a commuted sum for the 3rd is considered to be reasonable for this site in this instance. Design, layout and landscape considered acceptable. A new legal agreement would be required and believe that is being drafted as we discuss. In conclusion, the principle of the event's already been established. The proposed changes to the design and layout are considered acceptable in land use terms and on the grounds of visual amenity, residential amenity, highway safety, ecology and drainage. Affordable housing would be provided for the site. Recommended planning permission is granted, subject to conditions as section 106 legal agreement.
Thank you, Darren. Members, Councillor Ray Payne.
Yes, it's just a bit of a trip down memory lane. What I find annoying, and it's nobody's fault, is we had came up in a meeting a while ago. We can't find anyone who's prepared to build affordable homes less than a certain number. So I well understand what's happened here. I find it really irritating that that's the case, but it is the case. And areas like Ryehall, and I don't know it well, obviously Councillor Wilby knows it much better, but obviously you need a mix of housing in the countryside. We talk about it all the time here. We had a plan to provide it, and now we're having to tweak that plan because we simply can't find a provider to do the building. And I think
Unfortunately,
it's
that's
ridiculous.
something that we
Yeah.
we can't consider, and I suggest talking to your portfolio holder on that subject.
I'll bear that in mind.
Bear that in mind. If you need pointing in the right direction, I shall do so. Members, any further questions? Councillor Andrew Brown?
Yeah, I think it's 89,000, is it, the commuted sum? Is that, does that come from some sort of special formula? How's that arrived at?
Yes, yeah, there's a formula that the housing team use based on the size of the unit effectively, and that then equates to as you can see the calculation on page 2 that gives you the 89,000.
I think we've debated that point before, and yes, it never seems enough, but that's the formula for you. In that case, we move to the recommendation for approval. Please can I have a proposer, Councillor Karen Payne, and a seconder, Councillor West. All those in favour?
That's unanimous, Chair. Let's carry on.
Thank you. We now move on to item 5C, 2023-1295 FUL 8 Catmas Park Road, Oakham. Fabric improvements to dwelling consisting of rendering exterior walls, insertion of roof light to southern elevation, repairs to existing ridge tiles. Recommendation for approval. Justin is going to be presenting this. I believe it has come to committee as it is a property of a current member.
That's correct, Chairman. So I'll just catch up with the slides. So, as you said, it's off Catmas Park Road, and you can see the site just highlighted in red on the screen. The existing property, you can see there is a bungalow. It does have some room in the roof space, and you can just see this picture, which I think is a shot from Stamford Road, looking back across the field to the rear of the property. Here you've got the existing and proposed. The main proposal is to render the property with an off-white render, and then there is also a roof light posed on the southern elevation at the front of it's on the side elevation, but towards the front of the property here, which would be in this location here. So this is just showing where that roof light would be located on the property. And so just roads, this is shots from Catmas Park Road. You can see a new property that's gone up adjacent to it. This just shows the tree at the front is covered by a tree preservation order. The proposal is, and secured by condition, is to have this protective fencing around the grassed area to make sure that there's no building material or anything parked or placed around the tree in order to protect it. This is just some examples again on Catmas Park Road, just to show that there is render used. As you can see, that this is a couple of houses down, and this is just around the corner The relevant policies are listed there and in the report. But overall, key things, the site is within the conservation area. And the proposal would change the brick to render, but that would not be out of keeping with what's in and around the conservation area at the moment. And the alteration to include an additional enveloped roof light would not result in any significant or unacceptable overlooking of the neighbouring properties. And on that basis, Chairman, it is recommended for approval.
This seems to me like a fairly minor alteration to the building, and the only comment from a neighbour is that it looks like an excellent design and proposal we fully support. So I think I'm of that opinion as well. Yes, I'm happy to propose.
Thank you. And a seconder? Is it Councillor West? Thank you. All those in favour?
It's unanimous, Chair, that's carried.
Thank you. Could somebody go and retrieve Councillor Raymond Payne, please? Sorry? Diane Ellison. Yeah.
Obviously you knew that.
We refused it because I knew you, Ray. Thank you. Members, please, we've had a long meeting, so let's we have the appeals report, obviously, if Darren and Julia want to disappear.
Okay, so in terms of the appeals report, page 97, at the bottom there, 2.1, these are just new applications that new appeals that have come in, which was for the erection of 8 dwellings at Land off Main Street, Cottesmore, which was one that was refused by committee, I think, the other month. We have.
Was that recommended for refusal or approval?
It was for approval, and it's gone for refusal. I think that's a reasonable one. If I'm honest, I think that because of our 5-year housing land supply position and the fact that it is currently outside the PLD, I think it's, we've got a reasonable case on that one. And as you'll see from some of the decisions that we've got back, we've been quite successful on those grounds recently. I think. Yeah, sure. Yeah, no, yeah, not a problem. I'm not sure whether we've submitted the statement yet or not, but I'll check for you.
Well, not this, the appeals report is to be webcast.
Yeah, I think it's after this that we. So the next one that's come in is for a single dwelling at 17 Whitwell Road, Empingham, which I think we had an application for 2 on the site and 1 the appeal. They've now reduced it and come in for 1. I don't think, from our point of view, it doesn't change the position. So we'll wait to see if an inspector takes a different view. The next one is land south of Barradon Road, which was change of use of agricultural to a sports field for archery. Again, refusal, and we'll see. Seems to be quite a few appeals that have come in. The next one was land at Bornston Road, Oakham, which was retrospective erection of a temporary wooden shed. That was for to provide shelter for dogs during dog walking activities. Again, the reasons are all set out in the report. The next one is a change of use of land to residential use, and that was at Glebe Farm, Empingham Road. And then New Quarry Farm, Hollywell Road, which was for the removal of a condition for an access track not to be brought into use until the grain store had been fully constructed. This is, I think, the applicant is Mr. Fiducia. I think we've had quite a few applications up and around this area, and part of the reason that we allowed such a significant track was because justification was that it was required solely for the grain store. And I think part of it is we're concerned that they're seeking access to try and use it for other purposes, in particular a residential access to the site. Yeah, and the grain store hasn't been built. So we'll see where we get with that one. We have been successful with some appeals up there, but it is an interesting one where we've had a few challenges on that side, and we'll certainly be fighting that case strongly. Next one is land to the west of Applegate House, Bullbrig Lane, Whitwell, and this is the erection of three dwellings on land west of Applegate House. Again, reasons set out around outside I think the limits to development, and the fact that we have the 5-year housing land supply, which sort of then turns us to some of the decisions that we've had. The first one, which is on page 102 in section 3, land off Willoughby Drive, Empingham. This was an outline application for 4 dwellings. The inspector agreed with us in terms of the urbanising impact. It was outside the PLD and the impact on the conservation area. There were some other points that the inspector didn't agree with us on. That was more in terms of the number of dwellings, but we were sort of saying that you weren't getting the right density on there. And the inspector just quite rightly to some extent said, well, I think it has an impact, therefore to have more would only have a greater impact. So it would be, I think that was his main argument there. Then the 8 dwellings south of the Lodge Trust. This was one where it was outside the PLD. This was at Market Overton. And the other issue was we had concerns because there were a number of trees going down the boundary, and we were concerned that would cause overshadowing and impact on the residential amenity of the properties. The inspector agreed that it would result in poor living conditions. Manor Green, Ketton, which yes, I think we were quite pleased with that decision. Again, outside the PLD, contrary to a number of the neighbourhood plan policies as well. And there was concern about impact on the countryside, not really a sustainable development, and concerns about the design, especially around the access road and the loss of a small area of open space. So all of that weighed against any benefits of the housing. And then I think finally is 22 and 24 Northgate, which is the installation of 4 conservation roof lights in a property in Oakham. It was a roof that it had nothing in it at the moment, and the inspector concluded that, and it was a listed building as well, that to punctuate it with roof lights would have a significant impact, especially when they had roof lights on the other side of the roof, which were less prominent. So weighing that up, we were successful in defending that. So of the 4 decisions that have come in, we've been successful, and I think we've been on a good roll at the moment. So touch wood that continues. But obviously we've got quite a few appeals come in, and we'll see how we get on with those. Thank you.
Thank you. I've not been made aware of any urgent business. Date of next meeting is Tuesday, the 19th of March. That concludes the business of the meeting. Thank you all for your attendance. I declare this meeting closed at 8:50 PM. Thank you, everybody.